problem with most finesse baits that you start throwing is that they are very light and they're hard to fish when you get any kind of wind or waves on the water. Well, I'm here today to talk about a finesse bait that I love to throw specifically in conditions where you get wind and waves like we get in the fall right now. So today what I want to talk about is a finesse jig. At the end of the video, I'll talk about some of my favorite finesse jigs, but right now, let's get into how to fish a finesse jig and why you need to be fishing it. When you fish one of these finesse jigs, you actually get to throw it on a bait casting setup, which is an amazing advantage when you're fishing around groups of fish or just fishing in general, because I can pull those fish out of there and get them up into your boat so much faster. And so the gear that I like to run that on is a 7-to-1 or an 8-to-1 gear ratio. This is an Arc G5 bait casting reel. I also like to pair that on an Arc Invoker Limited series. So this is probably my favorite finesse jig rod ever, just for the sole reason that when you're throwing light wire hooks, this rod has a lot of flex and a lot of give to it, but it also has a lot of backbone. And it's a 7.2, so it's got that little bit more length to give it more of a parabolic bend, but it's honestly the best finesse jig rod that I've ever used. If I have one confidence bait, this is it. This has been a setup that has got me paid in a lot of situations because it's just flat out a bite getter. I can go to any body of water and know I'm gonna catch fish, and I've even done good on the Potomac River throwing these small finesse jigs in places that I know it shouldn't work, just because these baits cause such a reaction and they just are buggy looking. You know, they have these finesse style skirts on them. It's not over bulky, and it's just a really great way to get a bunch of bites. And I wouldn't be saying that if I didn't get to see them firsthand with Jamie Hartman actually in an open that he won. I got to be a co-angler to him and actually watch him throw at smallmouth and largemouth, sight fishing them with a 1/2 ounce finesse jig in like 4 feet of water. And so you would watch the fish become cruising by, he would pitch it just out of sight, they would watch it come down, he'd hop it once, and they would come over and eat it. No question about it. And he didn't have a single fish reject it, which was amazing for me to see on a super pressured body of water, that the fall rate of that heavy tungsten head in this small compact jig, just how much those fish responded to it, because it was something I was throwing a Ned rig at them and they wouldn't touch it. Because a Ned rig, they get a lot of time to look at it. So they would watch that bait fall, and as you hop it, it hops and glides, and so they don't have that need to come get it, versus this small finesse jig, because it's so compact and it's so heavy, as it's falling, you get that reaction strike where those fish feel like they need to eat it right now, because it almost looks like it's gonna get away as it's moving so fast through the water column. And then especially because you have that bait caster, you could crack them, get them in the boat right now. Like, you can flip pretty much everything under 3.5 pounds with some of these smaller finesse jigs, no problem. Because all of the finesse jigs that you would normally throw, you have to throw those on a finesse rod, a spinning rod. And so being able to throw them on a bait caster, I can put compact profile baits into areas that you typically wouldn't think about. That Z-Man cross-eyes finesse jig is my favorite dock skipping bait, because it has a slower fall rate, but it has that compact profile. So when you're fishing around pressured docks, you're fishing around lakes that just get a lot of pressure on those areas, or you're fishing clear water docks, you can flip into brush, you can flip around these docks and still be able to get those fish out without ever having to lose a sweat about it. It's no problem. Like, I skip a lot of those docks with 25 pound with a 3/16 ounce jig, but it works out so good for me because I can put those into situations that those fish don't see. If I was throwing any other kind of finesse bait, I would have to worry about open exposed hooks, I'd have to worry about light line, but I can throw this compact jig with this light wire weed guard on there into some of these places and pull these fish out and just honestly catch some of the biggest fish because of how well a jig has that big fish profile in places that you wouldn't expect to do it. So this also comes into play if you're fishing a spot that the fish aren't loaded on. You know what I mean? If you're fishing a large gravel bar, or if you're fishing a large hump, somewhere where those fish aren't just concentrated on one specific spot and you have to fish a large area to find them. If you're throwing really light finesse baits, it can take you a while to figure out where those fish are at, or you get turned off on it too quick. There might be the winning fish, or there might be some giants there, but if it takes you too long for every cast to try to catch them, then you're gonna get burnt out way too quick. And so that's also another reason why I like this small, compact, fast finesse jig, because it allows me to cover larger areas faster on places where those fish aren't as many. There's fewer fish on those specific spots. So there are two finesse jigs that I really like to throw, and the first of which is that Kitech M2 finesse football jig. This has been one that I've kept under my hat for a lot of years, and I use it for largemouth, spotted bass, smallmouth, all of them. And what I like about it is it's just a small, compact presentation that sinks really fast, because when you think about how bait fish and crayfish and everything on the bottom moves, they don't move slow unless it's in the wintertime and it's cold. When it's warm out, when it's, when they're feeding on the bottom, those little things are darting around and moving around. And so when you fish a small finesse jig like this, I like it to do the same. And so what I did is I fished this in a quarter all the way up to a half, and I just fish it just like I would a regular jig, but every time I hop it, that sucker darts and moves a little bit more, and so it keeps it on the bottom better, and it maintains bottom contact, and it kind of moves around like a crankbait would deflect. That's what this little sucker does too. The reason that I like the M2 Finesse football jig is it has a great tungsten head in it, first off, and I really love the skirt of this bait. You can see how supple this skirt is. Jigs are known for having a really big presentation. When they sink, they flare out. This one doesn't have a tendency to flare out near as much as most other jigs do, and it's more of a natural skirt that when you pull it, it compacts it a little bit better, and it still opens up, and it's just a nice living rubber skirt. Now, the other thing that I love is it has a super finesse weed guard on it. You can see how that baby it's literally like 6 strands. There's 5 strands on there. And so my hookup ratio is through the roof. If they eat this bait, I'm putting every single one of them in the box, just because there's not a lot to get in my way. It's just enough to keep algae and keep it out of the rocks a little bit when I'm fishing hard bottom. That's when I go to this bait. And it also has a phenomenal finesse hook in there. I'm not sure exactly what hook they put in this baby, but it does a great job at pegging those fish so that when I do hook one, I get every one of them to the boat, which is what I really, really love about this small finesse jig, because they just kept all the portions just perfect for creating a small finesse jig like this, and that a Ned rig fits on there perfect, and some of the other trailers that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but they just stay perfectly on there. So when I'm fishing gravel and hard bottom, this is the jig that I go to. Now, if I'm fishing around docks, if I'm fishing around wood, if I'm fishing around anything that I need to keep that jig from getting stuck, that's when I go to the Z-Man Craw size finesse jig. This is a finesse pitching jig. This little baby has a super stout hook on it. You can see I even bent it up a little bit. That's one of the tricks that I do to this finesse jig, but it also has a much thicker weed guard on it. And it also has a great keeper for Z-Man baits on it. Has just a little wire keeper on there. But what I like about it is it has that wedge style head. And so it goes through grass really well. It comes around wood really, really well. And that's what I love to do with this little guy right here. It also has a nice soft skirt on it. I usually will trim it up a little bit. You can see with this crayfish pattern on there, it's a little long. But this one will go through pretty much everything without getting hung up. And that's one thing that I really wanted in a finesse jig like this jig right here. The only modifications that I will make is I will bend this hook up a little bit, and generally I will trim some out of the weed guard. I never make my skirts or my weed guard shorter because it makes them stiffer, but I will trim strands out of the weed guard to make it a little bit thinner, judging on where I'm fishing. If I'm fishing around docks, I might make it a little bit thinner. But if I'm pitching into thicker laydowns, I'll leave it a little bit thicker to keep it through those laydowns. Another big key when I'm fishing this is I always position myself in deeper water. And that's a really, really critical part of this, because you want to drag it down, because if you try to drag it up into shallower water, you're going to get hung up a lot more. And so by keeping yourself on the deeper side of it, it really sets you up better to drag it through there, and it's going to allow you to get a lot more bites on your cast. And I know I love fishing this from shore, and so if I'm fishing it from shore, or you're fishing it from shore, always keep some of these 1/4 ounces or use heavier line, because if you use that heavier line, like I said, as you pull it, it will pull it up over those rocks. But if you're trying to go with 12 or 10 pound, what you're going to have happen is it's going to bury itself into the bottom, and you're going to lose a ton of these little jigs, a ton more than you should be losing. You know, most of the time I position myself deeper, because then it will drag and fall down, and as it's falling down, it'll stair step itself, and it'll have the opportunity to fall fast, like I talked about, and get that reaction strike, as opposed to dragging it up in. You're going to be pulling it directly into the cover. So when I'm fishing this jig, it's really important with this finesse jig to let it fall on super slack line. So I'll make that cast, I'm gonna give it some line and let it fall straight down, because a lot of times that's when you're gonna get your initial bite, or your bite on a lot of these casts, because it works so fast. But then the key when I'm fishing it is give it a high rod angle, because what that's gonna do is that's gonna keep it out of the rocks. So I really think the main reason that I love throwing one of these small finesse jigs is the fact that it just imitates everything on the bottom in a better way. You know, a Ned rig, a shaky head, a tube, all of those baits work really, really well. But what a finesse jig does is it lays horizontally on the bottom, and I can crawl it and count every single rock as I'm fishing some of these places. So as I'm fishing it, I can keep it down in the bottom and just be truly dredging the bottom with it. And it really piques those fish's curiosity because this is a tungsten head, and when that head hits the bottom, it creates more sound. And so as I'm dragging it, it is constantly making sound, crawling and creeping through the bottom, but you get that reaction strike like you would get with a tube because it hops and goes down a lot faster, and it gives it that reaction, and almost like a tube would have, although it doesn't spiral and go way out. It's really fast, and so it really makes those fish have to make that split decision to whether they're going to eat it or not. Plus I get to throw it on a beef stick, which is something that I absolutely love to do because I can really crack those fish and pull them out of these areas and get back into that school so much faster. So one other big thing with one of these finesse jigs is you have a wider head on there. So whether it's the Z-Man jig or whether it's this Kitech finesse football head, you have a heavier head on there and a wider head. So typically when you're throwing a lot of these baits, finesse baits have narrower style heads that tend to get caught in the rock, and these baits don't. Because of how that head is designed, it's gonna be louder and it's gonna come through cover better. And one thing that I really like to do with that is I actually pair it with a different line. So most finesse baits you have to throw with like 6 to 12 pound, right? Not these. I can throw this on 17 or 20 pound line, and I do frequently, still get a fast fall rate, still get a finesse profile to those fish. But then the cool part is if I'm fishing around heavy chunk rock, throwing heavier line like that, it puts a bow in your line, and so it will pick your jig up and over the rocks instead of dragging it through the rocks. Now if you're fishing sand or you're fishing gravel, you can throw it on 10 or 12. If you want to get it really deep, you can throw it on 10 or 12. But if you're fishing super shallow in heavy cover, like around these docks, around chunk rock, going with 15 to 20 pound gives you a bigger advantage because you won't get baits hung up nearly as often. So there's really 3 main trailers that I love to throw on my finesse jigs for different purposes. The first of which is a Ned rig. That is one of my go-to, and that is one of the most under the radar baits that you can put on a finesse jig. It basically just beefs your Ned rig up when you put it on a jig like this, so you still get a lot of bites like you would with a Ned rig, but you get the bigger bites and you get the more reaction out of that finesse football jigs. And I will have some of my favorite colors linked down below, as well as all of the rest of the gear that we've talked about today. My number 2 finesse jig trailer is going to be a double tail grub. This is that Yamamoto double tail grub. It is probably one of the best jig trailers ever made, period, especially cold water. But when I'm crawling that finesse jig on the bottom like that, there is probably no better trailer than that little double tail grub. I like it in the 4-inch. This is the 5-inch right here, and so I'll throw the 5-inch when I'm fishing a little bit bigger football jigs like you can see right here. But on that 4-inch, it is such a good bait to use on slow moving jigs like that because you get the nice twist and twirl of that grub. And so if you're looking for an all-around great finesse jig trailer, that is my number 1 all-around great finesse jig trailer. The other trailer that I really like is that Z-Man Turbo Craws. So you can see I have this one paired up, and this jig has been through some stuff, specifically docks. But this one has flapping craws on it, and with that Elastec, this is the one I like to throw when I'm using this Z-Man jig because it just holds up really, really well, like the jig itself, and it also slows the fall down. But what I like about it is it doesn't move as much on the fall as it does when I hop it. And so you'll get a little bit of movement out of it when it falls, but when I hop it, those legs will just really kick. And so it kind of grabs those fish's attention once you get that first hop out of it, and it will slow it down a little bit on the fall. All right, guys, so we are going to end with a Bible verse as always. And one thing that I want to talk about, if you guys are not familiar with the Bible, what I'm going to talk about today is Paul, who was in the Bible, who was formerly known as Saul before he met Jesus. So Saul was a persecutor of the Jewish people. He absolutely, if you believed in Christ, he would do unimaginable things to you and killed hundreds of them at will, always. And so he met Jesus. Jesus came to him in a vision, basically, and the light was so blinding, it actually blinded him for like 3 days, and they changed his name from Saul to Paul. That's what Jesus told him. Change his name, and then he became a follower of Jesus on the spot. As soon as the light blinded him, he said, "My Lord, who are you?" Like that. Those were his first words out of his mouth. And so he didn't even question it, didn't even hesitate with it. But what I really want to talk about with that is particular piece of information right there, how he went from Saul to Paul, how he went from a persecutor of the baddest of the bad to one of Jesus' disciples who followed him and was regarded as a holy man, is it doesn't matter where you guys are at in your life. It doesn't matter what situations you've been in. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter all of the wrong things that have gone on in your life and all of the bad situations and all the sinning that you've done. You can change it around at any particular point in time. It's not going to happen like Paul, where, you get a blinding light from Jesus and he's going to change your life right there. But you can change it. Your friends can help you change it. It just takes one little decision after another. And then before you know it, you're on a path to being a better person, by living a more godly life, going to church, not cussing as much, not sending that girl nudie pictures, not having sex before you're married. All the different little things add up to one big picture, and so again, I just want to iterate it. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you've done. Jesus loves you, and you belong in church. It doesn't matter if you think you don't because of all the bad things you do. That's exactly why you do belong in church. One of my favorite things to talk about is in the Bible, it says every sin is regarded as equal. It doesn't matter if you stole your neighbor's wallet or if you were murdering thousands of Jews, right? Every sin is still a sin. And so it doesn't matter what you did. You belong. Okay, you have a Father that loves you. No matter if your one at home doesn't, you have one in your final resting place that does. And it's up to you to be a better person for him and for everybody around you. And all it takes is one simple step. And you can start by reading the good book. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button to follow with the regular content. But God bless every single one of you guys. And I can't wait to see you guys in the next video.